Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. Continuing, Chapter 22. Hallway led into hallway. Chamber opened into chamber. Through portals gracefully arched, and winding staircases climbed to upper rooms, while hanging from lofty ceilings or resting on graceful pedestals were 1,000 alabaster lamps, shedding light and perfume upon this glorious home of his frigid Majesty Gelidus, King of the Cultic Quirks. Long rows of retainers, all in snow-white fur, lined the wide hallway as the guards conducted Bulger and me into the palace and bowed in silence as we passed. To my more than wonder, I saw that the inner rooms were most sumptuously furnished, chairs and divans being scattered here and there, all covered with superb skins of white fur, while the floor too was carpeted with them, and as the soft radiance of the alabaster lamps fell upon these magnificent pelts and set 10,000 jewels in the walls and ceilings of ice, I was ready to admit that I had never seen anything half so beautiful. And yet I was still outside the throne room of his frigid majesty. At length we came to one end of a broad hallway, which seemed shut off from the rest of the palace by a wall thickly encrusted with strings of great diamonds, each as big as a goose egg, extending from the ceiling to the floor, and turning back to the shimmer of the lamps with such a flood of crystalline radiance that my eyes involuntarily closed before it. Think of my amazement when the two guards, laying hold of this wall of jewels as I deemed it, threw it to the right and left till there was room for me to pass. What I had taken for a wall of jewels was but a curtain made up of round bits of ice strung upon strings and hanging like a shower of diamonds there before me, as they glittered in the light of the lamps, each side of them. I now stood in the throne room of his frigid majesty, the king of the Cultic Quirks. Now I realized that what I had seen elsewhere in its palace of ice was in reality but a sample of its magnificence, for here the splendor of King Gelidus' castle burst upon me in its fullest strength. Imagine a great round chamber lighted with the soft flames of perfumed oil, streaming from 100 alabaster lamps, the walls lined with broad divans covered with snow-white pelts, the floors thickly carpeted with the same glorious rugs, while on one side, glittering in the shimmer of the 100 massive lamps, stands the icy throne of the king of the Cultic Quirks, decked with snow-white skins, and he upon it with Schneebul, his fair daughter, sitting at his feet, and all around and about him, group-wise, 100 Cultic Quirks, the king, the princess, and the courtiers, all clad in skins, whiter than the driven snow. And you, dear friends, will have some faint idea of the splendor of the scene which burst upon me as the two guards drew aside the strands of ice jewels at the end of the hallway in the Palace of Ice. Like all his subjects, King Gelidus looked out through the round window of his fur hood, just as a big, good-natured boy does through his skating cap. The Cultic Quirks were not much taller than I, but were very stocky built, so that when broadened out by their thick fur suits, they really took on at times the appearance of animated snowballs. It would be hard for the fingers of the deftest hand to draw faces fuller of kindliness and good nature than those of the Cultic Quirks. Their small honest grey eyes sparkled with the boniform glint, and so broad were their smiles that they were only about half visible through the round holes of their fur hoods. I was delighted with them from the very start, and the more so when I heard King Gelidus cry out in a cheery voice, "A right crisp and cold welcome to our icy court, little baron, but from what our people tell us, thou carriest a pair of hands so hot that we beg thee to take a few days to cool off before thou touchest palms with any of the culticorps. And we also beg thee to be careful and not to lean against any of our richly carved panels, or to slide down any of our highly polished railings, or to handle the strands of our jewels, or sit down for any length of time on the front steps of our palace. And we make the same request of thy four-footed companion, who is said to be of even a warmer disposition than thou art." I bowed and kissed my hand to his frigid majesty, and I assured him that I should make every effort to lower my temperature as speedily as possible, and in the meantime that I should be extremely careful not to come into contact with any of the artistic carving of his palace of ice. Well, of course, reducing your temperature like that would, prove fatal, but, As I pronounced these words, the whole company began to clap their hands, and as they did so, a cold shiver ran down my back, for there was a sound, methought, very much like the rattling of dry bones to that applause. But I took good care not to let King Gelidus notice my fright. His frigid majesty now presented me to his daughter Schneebel, a pretty little maid of about 16 crystal winters, with cheeks round as apples, and as deeply dimpled as the furrows of a crossbun. Her eyes twinkled as she looked upon Bulger and me, and turning to her frigid papa, she asked for leave to touch the tip end of my thumb, which, being done, she gave a squeaky little scream and began to blow on her tiny finger as if I had blistered it. King Gelidus also presented to me several of his court favorites, all men of the coldest blood in the nation. Their names were Jellikin, Frostiphiz, Ekakul, Glacier Boy. They were all dreadfully slow thinkers when you questioned them very closely upon any subject. It didn't take me long to discover this. In fact, they requested me to be less warm in my manner, and not to ask them any posers, as they invariably found that deep thought caused a rise in their temperature. This was, to be honest about it, very annoying to me. For you know, dear friends, what a lodestone my mind is, never asleep, always in a quiver like mariner's compass, pointing this way and that in search of the polar star of wisdom. Upon making known my trouble to his frigid majesty, King Gelidus, he most gracefully ordered one of his trusty attendants to conduct me to the triple-walled ice cell of a certain culticorp by the name of Bullabrain, that is, literally boiling brain, a man who had been born with a hot head and consequently with a very active brain. For 50 years, King Gelidus had been doing his very best to refrigerate this subject of his, but without success. As I was just bursting with impatience to ask a whole string of questions concerning the culticorps, you may imagine how delighted I was to make the acquaintance of Bullybrain, or Lord Hothead, as he was called among the culticorps. But, dear friends, you must excuse me if I make this the end of the chapter, and stop here for a brief rest.